I don't know the words.
All right, here we go.
Hold up. Important email.
So I'll just launch into this general description. We're talking about tournaments. We're talking about organizational bodies,
Yes.
leagues, participation in different game titles, and that type of thing.
That's correct. So our first topic I want to discuss is which titles and team formations should you include when you're building a varsity university esports program.
Here's what's important to know, that most of the collegiate tournaments that determine national championships are organized and developed by the publisher of that game title.
Right.
So Blizzard manages all of the tournament and expects to be in charge of all of the tournaments associated with Overwatch, with Heroes of the Storm, with Hearthstone, World of Warcraft,
Because
StarCraft.
those are titles specifically owned
Blizzard.
by the company.
Those are all Blizzard titles, right?
Right.
So they have their own organization called TESPA, which manages the intercollegiate play of that. It's part of their business model, right? They create not just the playground equipment, but the playground and the rules of that playground. And that's important. So choosing your game titles that you're going to compete in is important, because you have to know that there's either a nice structure for play, or that it is a title that you've got really complete control over. There are a number of independent games that some universities play where there isn't a big structure.
Give an example of what an
CSGO, which is a Valve property.
Mm-hmm.
Valve is the company that manages Steam,
Right.
the marketplace, and metagame engine. Some people describe it
And
that way.
CSGO, sort of on an
Counter-Strike
international
Global
platform,
Offensive.
is extremely popular.
Mm-hmm.
However, as a university, one of the important factors you want to consider in choosing particular title is whether or not that title is going to accurately represent the values and missions that you hold as a university. So,
Right.
In our particular opinion, we have chosen certain titles that moved away from any sort of actual shooter games where they're using weapons that are modeled after real weapons, such as assault rifles, et cetera, in order to hunt or shoot down other people. And we have specifically chosen to stay away from those games, as well as games that have splatter.
Right. Simulated violence is very different than fantasy violence, and the ESRB rating system says that. We choose games that are T-rated, which allows for fantasy violence,
T for
mages shooting fireballs at orcs, versus simulated violence, which is a very specific Glock 9, which uses a very specific extended clip, which you can buy in real life, and a shot to the head results in a blood splatter on the wall behind. Right. Yeah. Those would be an M-rated game, mature rated, and we choose eSport titles that are T-rated. And while they do have combat in them, they're not kills, they're eliminations, and you
can always respawn.
You can it's not death. It's simply a penalty.
It's a timeout of the game before you can regenerate yourself as a player and then rejoin in the action. In that way, it's not that dissimilar from a sports-related game where you might be benched for a certain amount of time before you get to join play again.
Yeah, or a penalty box, right?
Box, right.
Yeah, exactly. Where the results, the penalties for elimination are always temporary.
So we made the choice to specifically draw the line at fantasy violence, and nothing that would be more aggressive than that. And also there would be games that are rated, again, T or less, something like Rocket League, which is basically cars playing soccer.
Now, sometimes cars will explode, right? But again, it's a a 3-second penalty, and then that person is placed back at their defending end of the field with no advantages that they had built up over time.
Right, but correct me if I'm wrong. A title such as Rocket League doesn't include you trying to be aggressive toward another player. Instead, your goal is to try to get a ball into the other person's goal.
That's the overall goal.
Okay.
MOBAs like League of Legends and Heroes of the Storm,
Massively online battle
arenas, right? Are games where the goal is not to kill each other. The goal is to eliminate the team's core, which is a structure at the end, or the nexus, which is in League of Legends. Overwatch is a game that is about capturing objectives,
right,
or moving a payload from one location to another.
So not that dissimilar from a group of kids playing capture the flag on a playground.
It's very similar, yeah.
In essence. And so really, I think the point here is that in choosing the titles, you want to look for ones that obviously are popular amongst student groups,
right?
That competitions may already be well organized and exist, so that there's a rule structure, a familiar rule structure that's already in place. Right. Ones that are rated T or below by the rating association, and enough to represent a variety of different types of games. So, for example, a card-playing game that's very interesting, involves a lot of strategy competition, not maybe dissimilar to watching a poker tournament on television, versus ones that are more action-oriented, that have more like a three-dimensional, large battlegrounds, large team play involved.
Right. Okay. How large a team should you have, right?
How large a team should we have?
This differs with the organization. It is based on capacity and goal, and what you want to try to accomplish with that. Some schools simply pick the exact number of players they need to play the game. Some will choose one more. Others will go for a more traditional sports model, where you have 2 times the number of players needed to hold a full game plus a couple, right? So that you can always compete against yourself.
So we chose, for our program, 5 titles.
Right.
The most involved, I guess, for multiplayer titles would be 6 versus 6.
Correct.
We also have a 5 versus 5, and we go down to 3 versus 3.
Yep.
And then even the single-player card type game involves a player that's manipulating the cards, but also 2 advisors. So it's really a 3-on-3.
Right. They've elected to go with the 3v3 model for that as well. Yeah, there are a couple of other games that we're not varsity in, but we have participants that are 1v1, like StarCraft.
And are those considered part of the varsity program? Like, how did we choose these specific 5 titles? Why stop at 5? Why not 4? Why not 7?
These 5 represented a handful of different types. Represented in our 5, we have 2 MOBAs. We have an auto sport game, right? In Rocket League, cars playing soccer. We have a team-based, kind of strategy shooter, right? In Overwatch, an objective-based, which is a first-person view, and we have a card game. Those kind of represented those. Missing from those is an overt sports game like a FIFA or a Madden, and there are some teams that play that, or NBA 2K, or one of those titles.
And professional sports teams actually have their own eSports teams around those games.
Yeah.
So in other words, so perhaps point out professional basketball has their own eSports league around basketball gaming.
Yes.
So that may be something we look at into the future.
Yeah. And the flexibility of multiple games gives us the ability to reconsider each title each year based on popularity and, frankly, the opportunity for competition against other schools. As a collegiate program, our bread and butter is playing against other schools, and so we have to, in a sense, make sure that we're we're trying to grow on fertile ground. I mean, we want to be able to play other schools and have meaningful matches. And if no one's playing that game or not enough people are playing that game, then it doesn't.
It's not worth it because you end up playing the same teams over and
Right.
over again, given the current schedule. And
Right.
right. So as we see, do you see? Well, that might be a question for later.
Well, in addition, the reason that these games were selected is because they had strong tournament coordination around them.
right, that already exists.
Already exists.
And
It
that we
allows
can
us to
leverage
plug
that-
into them. Yep.
Leverage their existing tournament structure. I guess the intellectual property holders of those games are excited about moving into a collegiate arena.
Yep.
They were very
or already have a very big presence.
and they're very supportive of what it is that we're trying to do at the college level. So I think you're going to see, as this plays out in the next few years, especially some of that molding around these games, the promotion aspects, the support that collegiate teams receive may change, may wane, may increase. But the important thing is that you can maintain flexibility in a sport such as this, whereas maybe other more traditional sports and athletics, once you get that team and those pieces in place, it's a little bit harder to change out, change over, modify.
Right. So it's good to think about esports also kind of fitting within the track and field model. And there are times when specific events are held, and other times when they're not. Steeplechase, depending on what conference you are in, is a regular staple of that conference, or it's an event that's not included, the 3,000-meter steeplechase. Some tracks simply don't have the facilities to have a water jump and, and 4 stationary barrier jumps.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so they just don't have that event.
Do they do indoor steeplechase?
They do not do indoor steeplechase.
Okay,
so
so
it's
that could be
a
one of the
requirement
things.
of the outdoor season, right?
Right. So, okay.
So it's a specialized thing. So in the same way, there are some schools or even conferences that may not play a specific game because they, as a conference, just don't play that game, right?
Yeah, I always wondered that about swimming. So you got 4 strokes that are like commonplace in the events,
Yep.
but how come someone doesn't come up with a new stroke and adding that to the list of events? in
Well,
swimming?
the trudgeon, almost caught the attention in the 1920s.
What about swimming underwater? Can't you do an underwater
You could probably do
stroke?
an underwater swim.
Doggy paddle.
Yeah.
Very popular with the kids.
It is. It is very popular.
So they should
with
look
the
into
kids.
that, I think.
Yep.
So how do we communicate with these tournament organizers?
Most of the time, they have their own portal for communication. More recently, they have started to leverage other organizations like Battlefy to do their tournament organization and administration for them.
And that's a third party.
Third party, but still through the conference, through the organizer. Okay. Riot is one of those companies that uses Battlefy as their primary tool. TESPA has created their own tool called Compete, which helps to regulate the brackets of those. But we communicate online and through Discord chat with those organizers.
And how do you go about communicating to them that we would like to host our own tournament or our own friendly or set up our own scrimmage maps in a regular scheduled type format? Is this something that's difficult?
Well, there is some difference of opinion about the rights of a school to organize their own play. Most of the terms of service don't make any mention about any restrictions about you simply contacting another school and saying we would like to play. Where it gets into questions is when you want to organize a large tournament that is not part of this organization. In most cases, what they do, these organizations, is they invite you to participate as your own conference in their larger thing. They want to keep all of the play within their own sphere, which is a difficult thing to do. It's not something universities are accustomed to doing. I say all the time that Naismith, who created basketball, doesn't regulate
modern day basketball.
What modern day basketball? You're right. Doesn't not Mayan basketball.
Yeah, I mean, there's some Incas out there.
There's some Incas, right?
But
the idea that he is not going to, he's dead, but he's not going to come back and make major changes to the rules, that the game is now in the public sphere. That doesn't happen with digital properties, right? They they continue to tool and to improve and to change their property to keep them relevant. And so when you play that game, you're beholden to those changes. One of the more recent changes is the desire for them to limit the competition to just the spheres that they set up. Again, nothing will prevent a school from contacting another school, but in most cases, if you're going to organize a tournament or a structure through which an entire conference or a group of schools will play, you have to apply for that tournament license from the company. Unregulated, just play between schools, not prohibited, but an actual tournament that includes many schools and will have a winner or prize money or all of these other stipulations, you do have to apply for that. Now, in most cases, you won't be turned down. You'll simply be directed to do it a certain way, which is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It improves the competition quality. But it does add a level that most universities are not accustomed to.
And it's something that I think will evolve again over time.
Yeah.
It already has evolved quite a bit, but the involvement of certain title intellectually property holders, the representative of those companies, they want to ensure that their product is represented in a fair and in a good way across all tournaments, and that's really, from my communications with them, has been the impetus of their involvement or their level of involvement. So if they see it, they see it as an opportunity again to take their intellectual property, expand it, bring it to a greater number of people. But I think they're not quite sure and still figuring out this space as well in terms of collegiate tournaments versus one-on-one play, scrimmage matches, whatever you want to call them.
Right. So friendlies or just play between universities, easy to host. You simply pick a time and a place.
Right. But when it comes to broadcasting and setting up the live streaming of those broadcasts, there's a little bit more organization involved in that. However, at this point, the tournament organizers, the license holders of those titles, aren't deeply involved at that level yet until it gets to that tournament stage, which you're talking about.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about governing organizations and their rules. So when we first created, or in the process of creating, our official varsity team at our university, we actually joined NACE, the National Association of Collegiate eSports, as a governing body that's trying to provide some rules, some structure, some oversight that would exist, that teams could give input on, that teams become members of, in essence, to find and connect with other collegiate teams in order to play, scrimmage, in order to hold future tournaments with.
Yes.
And that there would be a set of sort of governance guidelines, whatever you want to call it, procedures in which the people that are participating could agree on in order to ensure fair competition. Is that correct?
That's one of the charters of NACE. Okay. They are an offshoot of the NAIA, the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, right? Which is in parallel, although a different body of participants to the NCAA, but similar. And their charge was really to add the layer of legitimacy to universities, so that there was a national organization which represented them. Bowling, for example, has a national organization that collegiate organizations can point to and say, well, they are the governing body.
Right.
NACE became that governing body for eSports. They have worked to put together tournaments with their member schools, and they are going through the same processes that everyone is now to organize tournaments through these folks. So while they help to legitimize on a college campus that there is a governing body, most of the tournament play is still organized by the publishing companies. There are two other organizations who have featured previously prominently in this process. One is the AVGL, the American Video Game League. The other is CSL, which is the Collegiate Star League, and they're just tournament organizers. They bring in schools, they organize a tournament, they match make, they build brackets, they pick a winner. And some of those are live and in-person finales. Others are entirely online. Both TESPA and Blizzard, which own a majority of the IP surrounding a lot of the games that we play, have made their games very difficult to play in those environments. And so you see AVGL and CSL playing games like Paladins and Dota and other properties that are not regulated by either TESPA or Riot.
Gotcha.
So yeah, Blizzard or Riot. So that kind of gives you a sense. So on the side, almost you have NACE, which helps coordinate colleges and universities for esports, gives them a head of state, as it were. But almost all of the actual governance of these games and the play with them are still held with the software title and IP holders.
Mm-hmm. So that brings us to the NCAA and its involvement.
Yes.
So the National Collegiate Athletic Association governs most of the scholarship athletics at I want to say larger university structures. We can say FBS type universities if we want, but also I think there's even more involved with that because you have the subdivision and you have the FBS
and the basketball only schools.
But by far the largest number of collegiate athletics that are publicized on television or promoted is regulated through this organization. And especially recently, at the time of this taping, there has been piqued interest from the NCAA as to the future of collegiate esports and whether or not they can or should or want to, three aspects there, be involved and what that might look like. So there's a lot of data gathering, there's a lot of information gathering, there's a lot of interviews with us as organizers with representatives of the NC2As. And this is sort of interesting because this is something that you and I don't necessarily agree on, but it's we agree that there's certain points of contention that the NC2A is, if they are to become involved, there's some pieces they're going to have to overcome. So one of the big things I like to point out is the professional versus amateur status, which under current NCAA regulations require participation at the amateur level. If they are allowed to go professional, either before they join a collegiate team or participate as a professional outside of their collegiate activities, then they'd be disqualified for participating as a university. And so that
in some but not all sports, right?
In some but not all sports. Thank you. So there's Title IX inclusion. So there's also regulations about the amount and fairness of equity in terms of involvement. If, for instance, if esports was added as a male-only sport or female-only sport, what that may do to the ratio of other programs that are meant for inclusivity in intercollegiate athletics. And then there's this factor of independent intellectual property, titles and rights, where you don't have to overcome that with something like wrestling or baseball or basketball. But these are privately owned intellectual property titles, which right now are the most popular titles that are being played throughout the university. And how might the NCAA try to go about regulating or organizing tournaments that involve these independent titles?
There are lots of complications to what NCAA involvement might look like. As you kind of go down that list, pro versus amateur, there are some sports in collegiate, in NCAA governance that have very strict rules on amateurism and what that is. Football, basketball are two of the most highly contested of those sports and what it means to be an amateur. In some cases, if you ever take more than $100 in a single year, you lose your amateur status and have to declare as a pro, and you lose your eligibility. Yet, baseball and hockey college students can actually participate in the draft for that sport, participate in minor leagues during the summer, but not lose their college eligibility. So they are
so based on the actual sport or event, there may be some
it's
changes
different,
in regulations which could allow for some flexibility or NCAA involvement at a esports level.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And what constitutes a professional status in competitive gameplay is a much broader conversation, because in baseball you don't have people subscribing to your Twitch channel to watch you hit BP.
Different. Right.
But you can make thousands of dollars a month streaming on Twitch if you're a popular player.
Sure, subscribers.
Right. Is that a violation of amateur status? Also,
The digital age adds a whole other layer of complexity.
It does.
As to amateur versus pro, and I think we agree on that.
Yeah.
In your crystal ball, you think the NCAA steers clear of esports?
Steering... Yes. Okay. If I'm going to take a hard side,
I'm going to make you say yes or no.
They steer clear of trying to regulate it. I think that they may dabble in trying to organize it, but trying to regulate who is eligible to play for a college team and who is not requires so many resources that the NCAA is currently not prepared to bring to bear. So it will take a ramping up to be able to fight that battle, as it were.
All right. Well, you've softened your stance on that.
Well, no.
Yeah, you have.
No, I think they may want to jump in on a tournament and help to organize a tournament, or to benefit from a tournament in some way.
Yeah. So this is where my experience in cynicism actually kicks in, because I believe the NC2A, when they see opportunity, when they see forecasting opportunity for revenue, and coming in, of course, with the view that they are helping in terms of fairness, in terms of competitive allowances and nuances. They're going to bring their vast experience to bear, find ways to create that revenue, and become involved in what is clearly a very profitable enterprise that is esports.
At the time of this recording, there's currently an investigation going on by an organization called Intersport, and we've been contacted by them to kind of give a sense of what's going on campus. And what I find interesting is that the questions that they're asking are not revenue related. They are interested to know, I think, to an extent, how much external sponsorship and how many scholarships, what some of those dollars look like. But many more of the questions are related to how is it perceived on campus? How do other students perceive your players? What is the general acceptance? They have more to do with college culture than I was expected to hear when asked those questions.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
That's the line of information gathering which is taking place. So I guess the real answer is we'll wait and see.
Yeah.
We'll wait and see what happens there. So when we talk about opportunity, inclusion, gender balance, our recommendation clearly is that while even if we aren't under NCAA rules and guidelines at this point, we want to adhere as best we can to the rules and regulations that are set forth and supported by NCAA programs in other athletic programs, but really ones that represent our college. For instance, I've heard you say several times is that we want our esports team to be representative of our student body and who they are. And clearly that means people of different ethnic backgrounds. That means multi-gender. That means a lot of inclusion with whatever decisions you're making in terms of how you go about making up a team, how you go about picking starting players for different tournaments, how you might offer new opportunities for other students to become involved, whether it's at the broadcasting level, the analytics level, the technology level, technology space, but offering and maintaining a level of integrity when it comes to inclusivity.
And we'll add to that. I mean, there are a couple of categories that we don't mention there. One of them is age, right? that this is a very unique sport where there may not be, to be involved at multiple levels, there may not be a simple age bracket that that we would expect to see. We expect to see 18 through 22-year-old basketball players, for example, male and female. We don't expect to see many 30-year-old college basketball players, although they exist and they've happened before. In esports,
I still have 4 years of eligibility.
You do have,
in
yeah,
case
you've got
anyone's
some
looking
time
for a 3-point threat.
The 3-point Brett. That's what it is. The thing that I think is interesting is that it's not the process of selecting where the real inclusion has to begin. It's in the process of involving them in participation in tryouts before a final team is selected. Two of our peer schools that we regularly communicate with and find ourselves speaking with at different events both found themselves in the unenviable position of having selected a team which they felt justified in talent was the right team, but was dramatically lacking in ethnic and gender diversity.
Right.
And so...
And when they put those folks in a 6v6 match on a center stage for the world to see,
yes,
quite frankly, it was a point of contention for them
right.
that they had, for instance, all Asian males representing their school.
Correct.
Which may have been a selection of perhaps some of the most talented portions of their student
Correct.
body, but did not feel representative of them as a school.
The question that I think is always worth asking, you mentioned the one, does this team look like us, is that, excuse me, are there individuals who, with the right time and teaching, would be able to be as successful as these others? And if the answer is yes, that we believe that somebody has the acumen to grow to this level, then we have an obligation to ourselves and to our team to make sure that there is a space for them. Now, that may not be a starting space for that person, but an opportunity to grow and to develop alongside those talented players, so that equity is possible. Regardless,
it's
and
consistency again with the university mission, the university values of which your varsity program is built upon. It's this idea that no matter who you are, where you come from, what you may look like, you have the same opportunities. You have the same opportunities for growth. And again, what you're building here is from an academic standpoint, individuals that are able to grow well beyond their perhaps potential capacity initially, and become good individuals. And part of that means working across those diversity issues.
And from the game developers' perspective, they have already started to model this diversity in culture that we see in the characters that they select. We regularly see African American, Middle Eastern, unique and different body types in both male and female heroes and champions.
Excellent point. And people choose characters that most of the time do not look or act like themselves.
That are there, they're not going for. But the important point, and this is their idea that I think we're bringing into team selection, is that one of the most important things to the success of a game is that a person can identify with someone in that team, right? Either they remind them of themselves or someone that they know and care about. So even within, say, the world of Overwatch, we have a character, actually several characters, who are in their 50s, right? And that's not common historically in video games, to have hero characters that are outside of that kind of target gender.
I want a 90-year-old I can select. Can
soon.
And just have like a, magical gray hair or something, because that's where I'm working.
You're working.
Yeah, I'm working on it. We got to wrap this up.
Yeah, we do.
So let's stop it there.
There we go.
On transcripts, we'll figure out a good place to stop.
Okay, I'll upload it.
Thank you. And if you can send it to that Google Drive to share.